think we're good for next slide.
All right, so a big focus of our project is on the overall broad topic of environmental injustice, and also expanding from that to create a more equitable workforce for our local community and residents. Next slide, please. So environmental injustice, as we all may know, that is really a big factor and really the result of a lot of the racial inequalities, racial, social, economic inequalities in our community. And as we can see that people of minority races and of lower social economic classes are more likely to live in areas of pollution and have less access to green space and efficient energy use. Next slide, please. And in our local community, more specifically, we can see that a lot of the residents in the northern Minneapolis community are individuals of minority race or of lower socioeconomic classes. And we can see that these residents have lower education level and make less income as they don't receive the education and training required to make higher incomes. And these will be impactful as that these will kind of like impact their access to energy use and a lot of other resources. Next slide, please.
So Renewable Energy Partners is located in North Minneapolis. So we used an environmental justice mapping tool to just depict some of the conditions in that neighborhood and discuss how they affect residents. So you'll see the red lands represent industrial and utility use, and gray represents a major highway, which brings with it air and noise pollution. There's also major emitters located on this map, as well as pollution and landfill sites. Next slide.
Right, but the really positive thing is that Minnesota's economy really is moving towards renewable energy in the next few years. And as we can see here, that a lot of our power right now actually come from non-carbon resources, which is really great news. But on the other hand, our workforce will also be short-staffed in the next decade. Oh, next slide, please.
So here's where the Renewable Energy Partners step in to create work opportunities. So Renewable Energy Partners is an organization that provides full service energy solutions and has a long-term commitment to tackling climate change while empowering the community through multi-purpose training. Next slide, please. So Renewable Energy Partners creates equitable opportunities. And here's some example of that. North Minneapolis Multi-Purpose Training Faculty, which offers training in construction and green energy trades, and which is also accessible by public transit, which in turn reduces carbon footprint and gives access to people that don't have cars. And for local students, the tuition-free options will be available for Minneapolis public school students, and that in turn could increase the graduation rates. Next slide, please.
So we've been working closely with Jamez Staples, who's the founder and CEO of REP. And in his words, he recognized that the state has some of the worst disparities in the country, and it was very visible to him in his own community. So he felt the need to do something as opposed to coordinating another study or just admiring the problem. Next slide, please. And so this is a depiction of what the training facility in North Minneapolis will look like when renovations, which are currently underway, is done. And you'll see it's located right on Plymouth Avenue in the middle of near North Minneapolis. Next slide. So REP offers a wide variety of certification and degree programs that can help students move from entry-level jobs all the way up to high-skill careers in energy. So that includes a wide range of pay opportunities. And the classes are in 4 key training sectors, including building science, energy, construction, and sustainable systems.
And one really unique way that Renewable Energy Partners is tackling these problems is through the implementation of a microgrid, which is the first of its kind in Minneapolis. Microgrids are in many ways energy distribution system of the future, and they provide, most importantly, energy sovereignty and resilience. And they're doing this through solar energy sources, as well as a communal energy storage battery that was provided by Institute on Environment. Next slide, please. As I spoke about resilience, this is more than just having energy on a small scale in a pilot project. This is going to really build a community in many different ways, socially, environmentally, and economically. And I'll talk about that on the next slide here. So socially, it's going to better adapt the community to chance disasters. There was a tornado in 2010 where I believe it was 2010, maybe 2012, but that basically in the past has knocked down power lines, completely separated the community from the outside world. The utilization of a microgrid is going to change this economically, as we've discussed. Like, it's going to provide intergenerational benefits as students learn through these technical trades and are able to better financially sustain themselves. And environmentally, it's obviously addressing the triple bottom line, pre-existing air pollution in North Minneapolis, and better preparing us for a climate responsible future. Next slide, please.
I think we're going to have to start to wrap it up here, just to make time so you guys can answer some questions and so other presenters can go. Is that all right with you guys?
Yep, we're like,
yeah, it's almost done.
Oh.
Well, I'll just say thank you for watching our presentation, and we included a link here if you'd like to learn more about Renewable Energy Partners. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now.
All right. Thank you. I think judges can go ahead. Jesse, you're up first.
I have a question. I work on a program where we bring high school, college, and even elementary school students together around sustainability. And I would love to learn more about your plans for getting this information into your high school and middle school partners, like you were talking about. This is so cool.
Yeah, we think so too. So we think like a presentation with different levels of simplification of the information. Obviously, microgrids are going to be harder for different levels of students to understand and get those benefits. So we're talking about different levels of PowerPoints that teachers could show to their students, as well as like in a video that's really short and enjoyable to watch, just because it is so important to increase education around these opportunities.
I know, I don't mean to take up too much time, but there are so many teachers who they're adhering to state standards with their K-12 education. And I think you have a really neat opportunity to bring this topic in a way that also fulfills standards that teachers have to teach in their classrooms, in their science classrooms.
Emily, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so related to Jesse's question, is there a plan to bring some of this curriculum to the state at large, and rather than just the cities at some point? I know it's still there's plenty of time to do things like that, but is there kind of like an intention for something like that?
My group can correct me if I'm wrong, but we haven't been told of any larger statewide implementation. I think the focus is kind of to build that resilience within the community, and then obviously hopefully expand from the future. So that's to my knowledge of what's going on with it.
Yeah, I believe that's the ultimate goal, just because as we touched on, the economic opportunities across the state are so quickly expanding, and we are in need of trained workers. So hopefully we can connect that supply and demand across the state.
Thank you.
I think you need to unmute yourself, Liz.
There we go. I have a question on the storage that was in the title. How is storage going to be playing a role in this microgrid? I am familiar with this facility. I've actually toured the facility. I know Jamez. It's great work. It's very exciting and very needed. And but I'm interested. I think the title of your presentation, it was storage. Could you speak to how storage is going to be implemented in the microgrid, and then part of the training? How do you see that integrating in?
Well, the storage is kind of the foundation of, from our knowledge, Institute on Environment's collaboration with Jamez Renewable Energy Partners. The battery obviously is going to provide that communal resilience in the case that energy does go off and they're offline, and they have, like, it's one of the first of its kind. I know it's a very innovative technology to have a battery of this size. In terms of training, I don't know if there are programs to learn about the battery as much as there are other technical trades, but it's going to be a great spot for research and more just like the utilization of a very innovative new technology. There's only 2 or 3 others in the state of Minnesota that we're aware of.
Yeah, and energy storage is listed as like an area of interest for classes for Minneapolis students. So I think that's a great area to expand knowledge of for students that are training in green energy trades.
All right, we're going to have to move on to our next presenter here, but there will be time for a big Q&A session once everyone has presented if we want to get into it more. All right, so our next presenter is Franco Garcia, and he has a video that he would like to share.
Hi.
Oops, this is not the right screen.
Just as she's pulling up the video, just to make a note, the project, this was one that I worked on myself and a partner of mine. His name's Jacob Moser for our architecture studio. In that studio, we focused on urban design and how policies like zoning is reflected in the real world and impacts our residents. Using the precedent of the elimination of single-family zoning in Minneapolis in particular for this studio. So we took our angle of the project to focus on green gentrification within the city and how sustainable infrastructure ends up rising property values and displaces residents so they don't get to enjoy those types of infrastructure. So we try to intervene that through these resiliency methods and distribution of green infrastructure in that urban design scale.
All right, here's the video.
Parks, parkways, and other natural features have served for recreational, commercial, and political purposes for centuries. While these infrastructures are important in maintaining natural resources and creating healthy, livable environments, there is an associated phenomena, green gentrification, wherein the development of sustainable systems incurs rising property values. As a result, residents become cost-burdened and are displaced by the very things that were meant to serve them. A notable occurrence of green gentrification is evident at Folwell Park in Minneapolis, as properties directly adjacent to the park have higher values compared to those further away. Other sustainable systems within the Twin Cities, such as public transportation, also demonstrate a pattern of concentrated infrastructure that drives increases in property value and a chance for green projects to become a commercialized amenity. This phenomena can be understood as a gradient, in which the development of green infrastructure fluctuates between promoting emplacement on one end and driving displacement on the other. By expanding the notion of what green infrastructure is and dispersing rather than concentrating it, ecological processes can distribute alongside community resiliency methods, subtly improving the environment and emplacement. Renters, ecology, and community groups within the Twin Cities all play a part in this proposal. Cost-burdened rent areas and their renters are subjected to a greater effect of displacement by rising property values. Disinvested areas suffer from conditions such as deteriorated and vacant housing and poor air quality, making them targets for development. Community groups understand their local urban pattern, becoming a vital asset in social development. These conditions illustrate key zones, issues, and opportunities to address green gentrification, and suggest several mechanisms that can promote emplacement alongside green infrastructure within Twin Cities neighborhoods.
Landscaping elements, like parks, are an example of the effect of green gentrification within the Twin Cities. Typically developed as concentrated large-scale projects, they're advertised as an amenity of the community and often overshadow their ecological impact. Parks provide stormwater management systems, a vital component of green infrastructure that deals with increased flooding. In a harsh winter climate such as the Twin Cities, biosoils serve as an alternative method in dispersing the ecological benefit of stormwater management and altering the urban pattern in a discrete way. These systems slow the flow of water and help retain rainfall in specific areas rather than allowing the natural topography to carry runoff sporadically. Pocket parks are a mechanism utilizing bioswales to deal with road salt and snow runoff in the Twin Cities. Road salt disrupts nearby soil compositions by displacing minerals or absorbing water and permanently altering the chloride concentration in U.S. waterways. These pocket parks consist of native trees and bioswale systems integrated with sidewalks. This configuration creates an appealing social space for the communities to interact in, provides public space for residents, and invisibly improves local environmental conditions.
Transportation dominates the landscape in the form of roads and highways, contributing to the carbon emissions released into the atmosphere through motor vehicles. Micromobile transportation has been a key measure to reducing adverse effects on air quality. Bike paths offer a more compact transport infrastructure compared to traditional roads. St. Paul contains a network of Nice Ride dockless bike stations, providing easy access to alternative transportation, but is limited within urban settings and its concentration of bike paths along main roads. Distributing bike paths more densely in St. Paul will provide micromobile transportation to substandard houses. Existing bike paths can expand into suburban neighborhoods. Small paths will cross behind alleyways, while dockless stations will be distributed evenly among retired land and vacant lots near them to reach everyone within a walking distance of their homes and reducing the congestion of motor vehicles. The underused space within an alley allows for minimal material change, modifying the social function of the space and subtly increasing use of alternative, ecologically friendly transportation.
Social infrastructure is critical when considering what constitutes green infrastructure systems and building resiliency for climatic weather events. Community groups, local businesses, and neighborhood organizations offer essential services, goods, and programs that help the community productively grow and evolve. These groups originated from the community and benefit from understanding the urban patterns they work in. They commonly reside in denser commercial corridors, contributing to concentrated emissions of air pollutants and placing residents at higher risk of heat stroke and other health issues during heat waves. Corner fronts act as a grounding element in neighborhoods, creating informal opportunities for sustainable relationships with residents compared to traditional commercial corridors. Dispersal of businesses along these corner fronts creates social stability, allows for essential services to excel in these environments, and promotes a mindset for more ecologically friendly decisions as a business in a residential locale. Community corner fronts can be configured to disperse at urban heat islands and locate these essential services closer to residents. The dispersals will be spaced depending on the current services offered by local businesses to mitigate gentrification that would occur by creating a mixed-use neighborhood. Now that Minneapolis has eliminated the single-family residential zoning class, intersections can be occupied with a mix of businesses and dwellings, including community groups and local organizations that contribute to their neighborhood. These community corner fronts act on the need for commercial liveliness and social stability within neighborhoods, while acknowledging the spatial requirements of implementing socially conscious green infrastructure.
Public transportation infrastructure, such as roads, are built primarily for motor vehicles. Neighborhood blocks can come together and reclaim the space of the road for other uses, creating a pocket neighborhood that allows for housing to be redeveloped with more variety and green infrastructure to be distributed. Pocket neighborhoods provide residents opportunities to use green spaces and connect with each other, addressing the need for the social dimension of green infrastructure by creating a public space for interaction. Reduced motor vehicle congestion on the main road resulting from alleyway bike paths allows local ecologies to grow along street verges and configure street parking into pocket parks. The inversion of the transportation methods in these areas creates a narrative more driven towards sustainability and reducing emissions. As air quality and pedestrian safety in streets improve, this process of road reclamation creates more vibrant neighborhoods, bringing more people outside and improving safety through mutual observation.
Deployment of these mechanisms can utilize government grants as funding for local neighborhood associations to develop projects under conditions that establish community feedback networks, as well as guidelines for acceptable quality and maintenance, and terms and conditions for expanding renter-occupied property. Community groups focused on horticulture and landscaping are recommended to oversee these operations. Agglomeration bonuses provide opportunities for expansion. By allowing property owners to retire land in exchange for tax credit, projects can vary in scale based on collective retirement and intended agricultural, residential, or commercial use of the land. As a way to manage even development of green infrastructure, a ratio of development compares completed projects of one block with others nearby, allocating funds between them to incentivize development on ones that haven't completed many projects or need more funding.
The interventions and framework proposed here disperse green infrastructure rather than concentrate it, mitigating the effects of drastic property value change and avoiding the threshold at which investment becomes adverse. As this system unfolds throughout the city, it becomes accessible to many, providing ecological and social benefits and keeping the green subtle.
All right, we can go right into questions now.
Well, that was a great presentation, and I was really interested in the approach. It's a very similar in the energy space. You're thinking about we're using distributed generation now, solar and so forth, where we're at, and you're distributing the benefits. So I really don't have a question. I just thought it was very intriguing. So thank you.
Thanks. I have a question about your creation process. I know this is a little behind the scenes maybe, but I know that this type of video is so engaging, and I'd love to know more about how you made it.
It was a grueling few months of work in Adobe After Effects and Adobe Illustrator. Our college uses a lot of that type of creative design process for the work. But yeah, a lot of it went behind like how to be able to illustrate these types of invisible changes into our real world and how we can demonstrate that those types of, or how we approach green infrastructure in this project in particular, how that reflects in response to the real world. So our uses of Photoshop for the collages, demonstrating like how that world would look, Illustrator and After Effects to demonstrate how those changes become applied. That type of work was a lot of it done on that Adobe software.
Thank you for sharing that. Well done.
Have you come across in your research a community or communities that have tried some of these approaches, and have you encountered any problems that they maybe hadn't intended to find, or have they found successes that they hadn't expected?
I would say one in particular is the Milwaukee, I think that's the name, Milwaukee Avenue Pocket neighborhood. There, it's in South Minneapolis. It's a neighborhood in there, but we've noticed, for the example of pocket neighborhoods in our local area, that was an example of one of the roads being taken over by the citizens. Instead of it being used as road infrastructure, it was more for like citizens to walk around and like engage in that area. It's shown to have like good improvements in like safety and security in that neighborhood, just for people having more active engagement to those outer areas. So the sort of natural resiliency method of like people being more aware of the neighborhood around them and like their neighbors as well, like sort of engages them with each other and builds up that type of community. In regards to the other ones, there have been many examples, but I'd say in terms of Minneapolis, where this project kind of like took a leap towards intervening with these proposed solutions, or these proposed like answers to those problems. So if you have any examples that like of other areas with these types of interventions, I'd love to hear of. I can't pull a bunch of the examples off of my head right now, but that's one of the local ones for pocket neighborhoods.
Thank you very much. In your proposal, you're moving away from larger parks. What are your feelings about those larger parks? Would you like to see them broken up, or do you think there's a place for larger masses of natural areas or semi-natural areas?
In our project, we actually recommended, like with some of the park areas, they could be opportunities for the nature to be able to sort of reclaim those spaces, become like actual, like utilize their large presence to actually be a driving force for sustainability for like the natural processes of nature. One of our ideas, which we didn't include in the project, but was mentioned, was the idea of just letting a bunch of trees grow into those parks, having a large area and being able to offset that carbon just by having a lot of trees in those areas and dispersing like new green infrastructure throughout the cities could utilize both aspects of the infrastructure to be able to make the environment and the social factor more interesting within the cities without causing, you know, more of that community displacement that happens when there's like those big noticeable like parks developed.
All right, I think we're gonna have to move on. Sorry, Emily, we didn't get to your question, but hopefully there'll be time at the end where you can talk amongst yourselves. Given that, Emily will be our next speaker today.
Yeah, so while Olivia, oh, it's up, never mind. Yeah, so I will try and make this relatively quick. I also want to let you all know I study theoretical and computational chemistry for the most part. I've left out a lot of the really technical stuff and really focused on the things that most people are able to understand and appreciate more than they might understand and appreciate some of the other stuff in this presentation. So this is the solvation properties of selected persistent organic pollutants and the relationship to the bioconcentration factor. I'm Emily Whitcop, and I studied and researched with Dr. Joseph Aaliyah here in Morris. Next slide, please. So I just want to start out with a couple of definitions, really. Persistent organic pollutants are, or POPs as I will mostly refer to them, are a pretty large group of chemicals defined by the United Nations under the Stockholm Convention. And I'm going to quote here what their definition is there, just because it's very specific. So, quote, chemical substances that persist in the environment, bioaccumulate through the food web, and pose a risk of causing adverse effects to human health and the environment, end quote. So they're awful for the environment. One of the most well-known POPs is DDT. And so next, the definition for stereoisomer. The two chemicals shown here are stereoisomers of one another. Both of them are chlordane. We have cis and trans chlordane. And you can see all the way on the right of the molecule, those two chlorines have different bond shapes. Those different bond shapes just show that the chlorines are facing different directions. So they're the same molecule, but with just a teeny tiny little change in the structure that can have a pretty large impact on a molecule's properties, which I'll get into again a little later. Next, the octanol water partition, oh, sorry, not the next slide. The octanol water partition coefficient, which I will refer to as the KOW, is a comparison of how well a molecule dissolves in octanol compared to how it dissolves in water. This is a really great way to learn about molecules and compare some of their properties. Octanol is considered an organic solvent because it's got a lot of, because it's got a lot of carbon. Water is a non-organic solvent because it's just oxygen and hydrogen. Lastly is the bioconcentration factor, BCF, which in the case of this research is a comparison between how much of a molecule or a compound is in the tissues of a fish after spending a certain amount of time in water that is dosed with that compound. The point of the BCF, the bioconcentration factor, is to measure how well a compound sticks in the body and bioaccumulates, like the definition of the POP said. Next slide. So selective POPs were a variety of compounds. I've listed 4 of them here, but we studied about 25 of them. So you'll notice I've got chlordane plus, endosulfan plus, and aldrin plus. Each of those is the kind of the flagship molecule for a pretty large family of molecules that are either stereoisomers of one of these molecules or degradation products, meaning that in the environment, these compounds will degrade into other compounds, usually in very small amounts. Next slide, please. This is just a quick rundown of the methods we use. They're different computational methods. ALOG PS 2.1 is an online tool. We used some equations given in a 1982 paper to calculate the KOWs, that octanol water partition coefficient. And then we used Gaussian, which is a computational chemistry program where you input a compound and it spits out a ton of data about it. So we used KOWs calculated by these 3 tools to compare to known BCF values from a variety of databases. Next slide, please. And so a quick rundown of results. Stereoisomers have different KOWs as calculated by our 3 methods, and therefore should have different bioconcentration factors. This is of note because a decent amount of the literature I read in preparation for this project did not differentiate between stereoisomers, despite the fact that they do have different values. The computational methods that we used are valid and usable for this purpose. And while we didn't find a defined relationship of just a plot of a y equals mx plus b graph, we did not have a solid graph there just because of some fishy data in a couple places. This could use a little more work to really finish that up, but it's still really valuable to see that we saw linear relationships. They just weren't quite strong enough to publish a defined relationship. And finally, the biggest application of this is that if we could find a perfect computational relationship, it's remarkably easy to input a compound, spit out data, and calculate information for compounds that we don't have any information about. There is a lot of data missing for some of the degradation products of those selected persistent organic pollutants because they're very difficult to study in labs because they only degrade in the environment. And they exist in relatively small amounts, but they can still do a lot of damage. And then this last slide is just going to be questions. And if you have more questions or you want to talk about it more, you're welcome to email me. That was a lot, but if anyone has any questions, I'd love to take them.
How did you get interested in studying it in this fashion?
COVID forced me to do something different with my research award over the summer, and a computational method is able to be done remotely. So I was able to do this from home and not have to go into a lab. Professor Joseph Alia has done a similar project on medication or like medicines for malaria. And so we applied it to a slightly different field, and I actually got really fascinated and interested in it. And I really fell in love with computational chemistry and studying it in a different way.
And have you figured out where you'd like to go with this in terms of future applications of it?
Yeah, so the downside is that until we get more data on some of these less studied compounds, it's very difficult to go forward. If there is something in the next 5-10 years where one of these compounds that is understudied all of a sudden causes some real issues in the environment or in public health, it'll probably come back. But for now, it's kind of going to be on the back burner. Personally, I'm very interested in some of the degradation pathways, especially those that happen in the atmosphere, and might try and do a little work on that in grad school.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Emily, that's a very interesting presentation. Could you speak to how you see this being applied in the area of sustainability or in the environment?
Yeah, so my biggest kind of view on that is hopefully if we can learn more about these compounds, we can also learn how to remove them from the atmosphere and from our waterways and our soil. Right now, there is a non-insignificant amount of some of these persistent organic pollutants stuck in our polar ice caps because the compounds travel so far and they like to stay bad. Some compounds that don't necessarily exist as POPs with that classification are not that because they don't persist. So I would love to see building up more information so that we can potentially find ways to pull these out of our environment and remove these toxins from soil, waters, and the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we're good to move on to our next presenter, Rebecca Schultz. I will share the video that you've prepared.
My name is Rebecca Schultz, and you can see my title in the left-hand corner of the screen and further broken down into my diagram. So to begin, I'll draw your attention to the blue 1 at the top of the circle. We'll just frame this presentation up with why we are talking about carbohydrates in the first place. Historically and to this day, carbohydrates have made up both the majority of agricultural commodity production and comprise 55% of our dietary intake in the US, according to N. Haynes. While there's been a vacillating degree of acceptance for carbohydrates in the US, carbohydrates are here to stay, and even more so, as we realize that in order to meet specific climate goals, we will need to increase plant consumption. Additionally, we know that what we eat is intrinsically linked to our health. So bottom line, carbohydrates matter. And if they matter, wouldn't the quality of these carbohydrates be of utmost importance? But before we get into defining what a quality carbohydrate is, let's talk about how we decide what a quality carbohydrate is first. We'll move to the right to the green 2, where you can see the contrasting siloed reductionist approach versus a holistic system approach. We're beginning to discover that themes do not operate in isolation, but rather systems. And thus, as we position our fields and departments in a similar manner, meeting multidimensional problems with multidimensional solutions will maximize results and operate as the world actually exists. Okay, so now taking this systems lens with us, we'll move to the red 3 to define carbohydrate quality using this systems lens. Historically, the 4 metrics used for carbohydrate quality have been whole grain content, fiber, added sugar, and glycemic load/index. These metrics should continue to be included in a future definition, given epidemiological studies linked to health outcomes. However, we argue that they should be incorporated using a standardized algorithm, as up until now, these metrics have been applied arbitrarily, yielding a non-holistic approach. From here, we'll move to the yellow 4 at the left hand of the circle, bringing these 4 metrics with us. But in lieu of systems thinking, we also need to think of broader concepts, such as sustainability, to include in a holistic definition of carbohydrate quality. How will our definition impact reference diets, agricultural production, and therefore our ability to reach goals such as the Paris Agreement? Thus, a sustainability metric is needed. Additionally, how the food is prepared matters just as much as what it contains. So including degree of processing, referring to ultra processing, and provided nutrients of concern as measures to consider. This brings us then to the center, which is at the heart of why we're doing all of this in the first place. As we've mentioned, as we create a comprehensive, holistic, systems-based lens to define carbohydrate quality, we will not only be impacting and improving human health, but also environmental sustainability, ensuring that those who come after us will have the resources they need to flourish and survive. Zooming out, you can see by this continuous circle that these things all operate in a relationship with each other, and we should too. Here's to future systems, collaboration for maximum results for human health and environmental sustainability.
And I can open it for any questions now. Thanks, Olivia.
That was a very interesting presentation. And I appreciate the systems thinking approach. That's extremely important. How do you see this being used in education, or how do you see this work that you have done here being used?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I think it could be used in a variety of ways, kind of along the food supply chain. So one example is the use of like a carbon footprint metric. So in Australia, on some of their cow's milk dairy containers, they have like, you know, this was from this farm and this is how much carbon was used in, you know, the whole supply chain of this product. So it could be used kind of to interface with consumers. It could also be used to inform formulation. So, you know, if you're at a CPG company, you could look at, you know, you're pulling up all of the nutritional information of a carbohydrate along with, you know, its life cycle assessment with its carbon footprint. So those could be simultaneous. And then you could use that to, you know, if you have goals as a company to reach have a certain climate impact, you know, hit a certain net carbon emissions by a certain time, you could kind of use that strategically within your company. And so it just gives a bit more like of a technical approach. And so obviously it would take a while to build up that data. There's a variety of whole grains and carbohydrates and things and how they're processed, but it's at least kind of shedding light on the need for not just having this one-dimensional metric that just looks at nutrition, but talking about, as you referred to, it's all part of a system. And so we need to have that sustainability metric is just as important as the nutritional piece.
And then to that, the refined part of carbohydrates. So certainly that has a health impact, but also has a sustainability impact. Could you just speak to that? I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and you're speaking to, just so I'm clear, like the process part
Right.
or the refined piece?
Right. Yep.
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, it's going to have negative health impacts, but something that we also focused on was that, you know, we have these 4 nutrients of concern that certainly in developing countries are more of an issue than in places like the US. And the only benefit of a refined food is that they're going to contain those nutrients of concern because they are fortified. So certainly they're using more energy, you're using more packaging, but then they're also providing this package of these 4 nutrients that individuals need to thrive and flourish. And so how do you balance that? How do you say on the one hand, it's making a dent environmentally because of the packaging, because of the energy, because of the input and potential health negative health outcomes. But on the other hand, it's a way to supplement folks that would not get this in other ways. So we weren't able to say, you know, what's a clear way to define that? Maybe it's assigning points or like a metric system to some of those numbers, but definitely just shedding light that it's not just one, again, that's not just one dimensional. You can't just say all refined foods are bad. Certainly they are in certain aspects, but in other ways they're not. And if we could find other ways to deliver these nutrients of concern, that would be ideal without having, you know, the other negative effects along with it. But yeah, just an area to pay attention to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, are there any other questions for Rebecca? If not, I just want to say thank you to all the presenters. Sorry, I live by the light rail. I just want to say thank you to all the presenters. It was awesome to hear all the work that you guys are doing. We do have about, let's see, like 9 minutes left before this section ends. If anyone would like to, I don't know, discuss further or ask any more questions to any of the presenters, just use this space to do that.
I do have.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I do have one more question. This one's also maybe a little bit different, but at UMR, sustainability initiatives and courses around sustainability are rather new. And we have 2 majors at our campus, and they're both health science related. And I know with the sustainability minor coming up, this is a really exciting time for our students to be able to plug in even more. But I would love to know from each of our groups, what brought you here to this expo? Was it your professor? Was it part of a class? Was it because you're involved in IONE? What got you into this space?
Good question.
For me, it was IONE. I'm part of a cohort there that's like across, it's multidisciplinary and across the campus. And I think I just saw like an advertisement for the expo, and yeah, so it was involvement there.
Thank you.
For my field, aside from minoring in sustainability, so having a natural interest in sustainability, my career field in particular involves a lot regarding like where people live, how people live, and how we design the real world. So aside from, it feeling like quite a big responsibility for my future career in terms of dealing with it, I think it's good to sort of get the ideas out there and get feedback from different perspectives and potentially get a new layer of understanding for my projects. And I assume for everyone else's as well, some ideas here were really interesting.
Thank you.
I have a friend who works in the Morris Sustainability Office, and they were hoping to get lots of people from Morris in, or at least several people from Morris in here. And she knew that my research was related and told me that I had to.
So she reached out specifically and said, do this thing.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, I mean, that sounds interesting. I may as well.
Great. That's great to hear. Thank you. That helps me. We're always looking for ways to bring our students into new opportunities. And with the health science focus, we're trying to expand what that means to our students at UMR. And I appreciate hearing how you got here and why. Thank you very much.
I have a question for Franco. What was the inspiration for your work?
For our project, at the beginning of it, we were tasked to like sort of look around the internet and just sort of through our own thought process of how we could intervene and address this, how zoning works in Minneapolis or in the Twin Cities, I guess. And one of the aspects at the time I was interested in sustainability. So me and my partner both brought up to our professor like different ideas. And something that I randomly passed by on the internet that regarded green gentrification happening in New York and in some parts of the West. I was like, this seems like something that's starting to actually happen here in Minneapolis. So I brought it up to the professor. We discussed it, and it seemed like a very interesting idea to tackle. And, like I said, I minor in sustainability. I'm all for it. Like,
yeah,
those types of impacts are really important.
Well, it's just a very interesting approach. If you think about it, communities promote their parks, their green spaces. But it's the folks that live the closest to it that, that benefit the most from property values and so forth. And so having a distributed model, I think, is really interesting. There are, if you pursue this further, I would encourage you to look at a development outside of Hamburg, where they have done this. It's mixed use development, redevelopment space, that they have kind of sprinkled these green spaces and biking. It's amazing a development. And then also in Malmo, Sweden has done similar things with community space. So it's very interesting. There are some examples of it, but the way you presented it was very different than I've seen before. And so I think it's something I would encourage you to continue to share.
Thank you. Absolutely. Agree.
All right, well, thanks again, everyone. Thanks to the presenters. It was great to hear what you guys are working on, but also thanks so much to the judges for taking some time out of your day to listen to their ideas.
It's a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good luck with all your work.
Thanks, everyone.